All right, the next speaker, thank you all, is a patient of mine and a really nice guy. He is a patient who came to see me, and he's one of those people that when you look at his x-rays, you go, oh, holy shit, Batman. This is not good. And yet he didn't think I was crazy when I suggested that maybe he would consider having his abdomen removed and transplanted with a new abdomen, called a multivisceral organ transplant. And the folks from the University of Indiana have done about 85 of these. And Dr. Paul Johnson is a hospice physician in the Pacific Northwest, and he's coming today to talk to us that he's back from the other side of a miracle. He's had his transplant, he's back to work full-time as a physician, a hospice physician, and he's going to sort of tell us what it was like to go out on the end of the 25,000 meter diving board and dive in. Thanks, Paul.
Well, I'm a little concerned about this trapdoor. I'm also
I'll seal it up.
I'm also a little concerned that I'm keeping you all from lunch. So, you know, it all started for me a couple years ago. I was startled slightly as the phone rang that Monday morning, just before noon. I've been waiting apprehensively for that ring, and my pulse quickened as the answering machine announced that the call was from my family physician. So, Paul, this is Roger. I have the results of your CT scan. Well, my heart sank to my knees. You see, I'm a physician. And when the news is good, it's easy for physicians to tell you over the phone it's normal. But when the news is bad, it's best to see the patient in your office, look at them face to face, measure their emotions, listen to them, and carefully plan out what your next steps are as you move forward in diagnosis and treatment. So, I practiced family medicine for over 20 years. I had a long, keen interest in end-of-life care. And several years ago, I studied up and I became board certified in hospice and palliative medicine. I left family medicine and several years ago now and became the full-time medical director of Hospice of the Northwest, which is just north of Seattle. And we service a 4-county region. My patients have chronic, incurable, life-threatening diseases, and palliative medicine tries to make their quality of life better, make them more comfortable. About half of my patients have cancer. I lead family and patient meetings every week. I give lectures to nurses, medical students, residents, and I also in-service physicians in our community and in our state about how to break bad news to patients. But you know, no amount of doctoring can fully prepare you for becoming a patient yourself. Go ahead, Roger, I said. Tell it to me now. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, Paul, but there's a mass in your pancreas. So my mind instantly started replaying the memories of all the patients with pancreatic cancer that I'd taken care of. These poor, frail, emaciated bodies. And he continued, your liver has multiple metastases in it, consistent with spread of that pancreatic tumor. Ooh, lesions. I hate that word. There must be some mistake. I know those scans have been switched with another patient. This report couldn't be mine. I couldn't be hearing that I am being told that I have cancer. And metastatic, well, I loathe that word too. My liver, lesions metastatic to my liver, that means it's stage 4. Well, it doesn't get any worse than that as far as it goes. Is there a condition worse than pancreatic cancer? Well, bad on worse. So my heart was now sunken all the way to my feet. So, Roger continued, we need to do an MRI scan and we need to get a biopsy of that tumor. Tumor, another word I just despise. And now that it was applying to me, I didn't like the word biopsy either. That day was filled with tears, and that night was filled with a racing mind, thinking about what was in store for me. So, the whole thing started a few years before with vague symptoms, and I bet a lot of you can empathize with that. I started having dizziness, vertigo, lightheadedness, fluctuating hearing, and lots of other vague symptoms that I didn't understand and doctors couldn't figure out. For the previous 3 or 4 years, I started having intermittent abdominal pain and bowel changes. But I'd had a normal colonoscopy, a normal EGD, a normal ultrasound, I'd had normal stool studies and normal blood tests. So I think I was told what many of you were told. I had irritable bowel syndrome. I was told that over and over again. But you know, it wasn't irritable bowel syndrome. The biopsy together with multiple other tests showed that it was a pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor, a PNET. It was the same thing that Steve Jobs had. He's the CEO of Apple. And he had been battling that for a few years. So I'd never taken care of a patient with a PNET before. I had distant memories of studying it back when I was in medical school. But I really had no idea what this diagnosis meant for me. As I started reading about it, I knew I was in trouble. And it became very scary. So despite octreotide injections from my local oncologist, my liver lesions continued to grow. It wouldn't be long, I was told, until I went into liver failure, just like Steve Jobs had. And Steve Jobs had a liver transplant. I wondered, could I possibly do that? So with my wife's encouragement, my wife Kim sitting back there, I went to Seattle Cancer Care Alliance for a second opinion, and I saw a pancreatic cancer subspecialist. But because these tumors are so rare, zebras, pancreatic oncologist, his name is Tony Bach, encouraged me to see this guy he knew in Louisiana. He was a displaced Buckeye.
Go Bucks!
And he was a subspecialist in neuroendocrine tumors only. So 3 weeks later, Kim and I were sitting in this Spartan exam room in Kenner, Louisiana. And we were shell-shocked that we were so far away from home and our lives had so metamorphed. That lively, gregarious, engaging, and stout Buckeye, Dr. Woltering, concluded that visit with 3 directions. They weren't recommendations, they were directions. He said, number 1, get on high-dose octreotide, not the homeostatic doses that my local oncologist had been giving me. He said, get on double-dose chemotherapy, because this is not a particularly good tumor. It was high grade. And can use that as a bridge till we get to number 3, which is go up to Indiana and talk to the group up there about having a cluster transplant. A cluster what? I said. Well, Dr. Woltering explained, and I later learned that the actual term is a multivisceral transplant. There are these surgeons up in Indianapolis, particularly Dr. Rodrigo Viana, who's going to be talking to you all tomorrow morning early, who've had great results with neuroendocrine tumors by replacing virtually all of the abdominal organs. They essentially remove everything that could potentially have cancer in it and replace it with donated organs. Wow, that takes a while to wrap your head around. In another 3 weeks, Kim and I had closed up our house, packed everything in our car that we could take, traveled 2,500 miles eastward, rented a one-bedroom suite in a hotel that was 1 mile away from Indiana University Medical Center. And our first visit to that center, they drew 38 tubes of blood from me. So after further innumerable tests, including scans and scopes, cardiac catheterizations, visit with social workers, a psychologist to make sure I wasn't crazy doing this, care coordinators, attending transplant education classes, and a 6-week fight with my insurance company, my name finally appeared on the transplant list. So waiting is difficult, so far away from home and loved ones. There's no guarantee of when it will be your turn. It could happen today, it could happen a year from now, and even longer. So Kim and I set about creating a new life in Indianapolis. We met other neuroendocrine tumors, neuroendocrine tumor patient and their spouses, and we became fast friends. We became brothers and sisters in a common cause. A nearby Lutheran church welcomed us in as one of their own. We spent endless hours at Starbucks reading and learning how to use our new iPhones that we just purchased in Indianapolis. I think Steve Jobs, my neuroendocrine brother, would have been proud of me for buying an Apple product. And we waited. So it was a Sunday morning in Indianapolis. Kim and I had earlier gone for a walk along the Monon Trail, which is a linear park. And it was beautiful, a spring day, and there were numerous cardinals making lots of lovely sounds in the trees. So after being caught in one of those incredible rainstorms with lots of raindrops, we ended up in Castleton Mall, which is in North Indianapolis. We were shopping at Eddie Bauer when it rang. I looked at it, and it was a local area code. There went my pulse rate again. So a man's voice said, "Is this Paul Johnson?" I said, "Yes." He said, "This is Indiana University. I think we have donor organs for you. How soon can you get to the hospital?" Oh my gosh, I thought. I took a moment to call Eugene Woltering out in the parking lot of the Castleton Mall. And I said, "Gene, am I doing the right thing here?" And he said, "Hot damn." He said, "I consider you an astronaut. Go for it." That's all I needed. So 2 hours later, I had exchanged my walking shorts for a hospital gown. Instead of my familiar physician's badge and stethoscope around my neck, I now had a plastic patient ID band here and an IV in my other arm. So I repetitively apologize to all the nurses and others for flashing them because that gown covered so poorly. But more blood, another EKG, and the now familiar repetitive squeezes of the blood pressure cuff and the red light shining through my finger from the oximeter. It was just after midnight on May 23rd, 2011. That's 16 months ago. It was almost exactly 4 months after we had arrived in Indianapolis that I watched propofol flow into my vein. His milk, Michael Jackson called that. There was a fleeting millisecond of euphoria, and then instantly I was immersed in the cacophony and the mayhem that is the intensive care unit. There were beeping machines all over, coming up with sounds up and down the hallway. There were tubes and wires everywhere you can imagine on my body, in a lot of places that you cannot imagine. So, as my anesthesia stupor started to lift, I became aware of soreness, and then it was pain. It was in my abdomen and it was in my back. Dr. Viana came in later that day to tell me that the operation had gone very well, and that I had a new pancreas, a new liver, a new stomach, and a new small intestine. I also had an ileostomy, so that they could take a scope and look in through the ileostomy to make sure that everything was going fine with the intestine. So everything had gone well, he said, during that 8-hour surgery. And they'd only had to transfuse me 4 units of blood out of the 40 that they had reserved. So the 19 days that I spent in the hospital were busy and they were sleepless. The nurses and others were always filling this and emptying that. They were balancing my immunosuppressant drugs and teaching me to care for an ileostomy and eventually reintroducing food into my new system. Kim massaged my achy back endlessly. And I got up and I walked the halls to try and distract my attention from the pain in my abdomen. The care that I received was incredible. And I've worked in a lot of hospitals, so I know good care. Everyone was so kind. But the best day in retrospect was the day the pathology report came back and said that all the tumor margins were clear and there was no involvement of the lymph nodes. I still had hope, and hope is a really important thing. So it felt really good to walk out of that hospital 19 days later, out of the front door, even if we were just going back to our hotel, not back to our home. 3 months after transplant and after many follow-up clinic visits, I had the ileostomy taken down. I was glad to get rid of that. A month after that, we drove home, and we took some days to go through Yellowstone Park, which is my favorite place on earth. But I still had no energy for hiking or exploring. So that, at times, overwhelming fatigue lasted for 6 months. I was eventually able to stop taking a lot of those really yucky medications, those things you take to prevent infections and other things early on and after transplant. My bone marrow started to recover and my anemia went away. With that, my energy just flooded back. And 7 months after surgery, I went snow skiing. And I got back on my bicycle. At 8 months, I went back to work at hospice. I had been on medical leave for 15 months. So, life is good. My scans and my tumor markers are normal. I'm eating normally and I have regained much of the weight I lost after surgery. I get hungry, and I feel full. I've gotten used to the way my new intestine functions. It really functions pretty well. So, the donor of my new organs was a 30-year-old man whose name was Matthew. He was from Wisconsin, and he died from a dissecting aneurysm in a vertebral artery in his posterior neck. He had fallen a few days before that and hit his head. And that artery dissected and bled into his brain, and he died. 2 weeks ago, his parents and his sister were visiting Seattle, and Kim and I drove down and met them in a very cute, small French cafe for coffee one morning. Through their tears, they told us stories of their Matt, and through ours, Kim and I told them our story of our saga with a neuroendocrine tumor. And we shared with them our incredible gratitude. So thank you very much.